So I really appreciate you guys coming out here and listening to me rant and talk. I think that it's an interesting opportunity to be here and talking to all of you guys about social entrepreneurship. I just came off a 3-day trip to Austin, Texas, actually where I started this company. Was hanging out with a bunch of folks at this Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit. There was about 100 people, CEOs, everyone from John Mackey to the CEO of the Container Store, CEO of Cinnabon. All of these people sort of coming together under this movement, an umbrella that I think we also call social entrepreneurship, cause economy. I think they're all sort of the same thing. So, I think the big question that ultimately people want to know is, what is rally? And I think that my answer will ultimately surprise you, or hopefully not, at the end of the day. But what I want to do first is show you a video. It's something that our team has been working on for some time now. We've been trying to come up with really interesting and creative ways to brand and tell the story of our company, about who we are, not necessarily what we are, because that's probably the most important thing to get across. So I'm going to take just a minute, about a minute and a half. I'm going to show you a cool video, and then we'll continue on. Sound good? Help you set that.
I should like to help everyone if possible. We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. We want to live by each other's happiness, not by each other's misery. We don't want to hate and despise one another. In this world there's room for everyone. Good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful. But we have lost the way. We have developed speed, but we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress, the hate of men who will pass, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. It is written that not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you the people have the power to create machines, the power to create happiness. You the people have the power to make this life free and beautiful, to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us fight for a new world, a decent world, that will give men a chance to work, that will give youth a future and old age a security. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Let us use that power! Let us all unite!
So, one of the reasons I like that video is not necessarily about how it ultimately makes me feel. But as we've sort of thought about how do we tell the story of our company, we really kind of thought, well, maybe we should tell that story of our own company through the eyes of our own users. So all the content that you see in that video is actually content that's uploaded by our own rally leaders. It's their stories. We're just simply using their stories to tell our story. And a lot of people will, ask me, what is Rally? What do you guys do? Or they'll say, Rally's in the crowdfunding business, or we're in the technology business. And ultimately, what I like to tell people is that Rally is actually in the life improvement business. And business is actually pretty good. We've moved a little over. There we go. We've moved a little over $325 million across our network in the last few years, from a little over 6 million different individual supporters and donors who have come across our network. And we've grown the business quite a bit. But that isn't always necessarily that victory isn't necessarily, an easy path to take. So I'll talk to you a little bit more about myself, and who I am and where I come from, and, what it took to get here, as well as kind of try to talk about the product and the platform, and ultimately the vision of where I hopefully take Rally someday. So I started this journey. I was a single father. That's my daughter. I wasn't honestly much older than you guys when I really began this quest. I was a little bit of a late bloomer when I went to college. I first started at Radio Shack, of all places, selling batteries and cell phones and crap. Went to college, had a kid in college, worked, and ultimately took care of my daughter and built this company. I'm a CEO, which has its own challenges day in and day out, and an entrepreneur at the same time. Ultimately, the things that get you through each and every day as you sort of struggle with the ups and downs of building a company, managing your life, your family, being an entrepreneur, an executive, you have to have purpose. You have to have a cause. I'm sure many of you in this room each have your own purpose and your own cause. Mine ultimately is Rally. It's pretty much the one thing I think about every day, all day long. It's the most important thing in my life, outside of my family. One sec here. That should be better. So I thought we'd sort of start with where this company ultimately began. This is a picture of my office back in roughly 2009. There's about 4 of us, a couple other co-founders who helped build this company. If you look outside that window, it's the Texas Capitol. Even that is a much prettier office. Actually, that's our second office. The first one I just don't really want to show you guys a picture of. It's pretty bad. But, we really got our start in political consulting. So before we really built the company, I was very active in the local political community, helping politicians and candidates craft online messaging and online, fundraising strategy. From probably about the time I was a freshman till, junior, sophomore year. Ultimately, I didn't make it all the way through my senior year in my undergraduate degree. I'm sorry. Hopefully all of you guys do. I certainly think it's important. But, it really kind of rested on me sort of self-identifying with a particular person, a woman that was running for public office, and all the trials and tribulations that she had to go to be a public servant. It was really difficult, which was really odd to me. And it was sort of through those experiences, those ups and downs, and the battles and the wars that had to be fought to help her campaign, and ultimately, she didn't win the election, but it was that going through that process that inspired pretty much everything that I'm doing today. And really that sort of, ability to build a platform to empower other people with purpose. Right? I want to give other people the opportunity to rally their friends and their family around the causes that they care about most, whether or not they have the resources available to them or not. Since that time, we've grown quite a bit. I left school and I guess it was roughly about 2009 or so. I was at the Macomb School of Business, which is a significant competitor to the Stanford School of Business. Just a little bit of a hook'em here going on. But anyways, long story short, we've grown. We moved to San Francisco. I literally loaded up a U-Haul in the middle of a storm that hit us. If you remember the political candidate Joe Wilson, who shouted "You lie" at the President of the United States on national television. He was ultimately using our platform and the initial concept of our platform and technology to drive fundraising, raising millions and millions of dollars in just like a day. Money was just sort of like pouring in to our company. And that's really when I sat back and said, we have stumbled onto something pretty amazing here. And I need to go to the one place that you go when you need to scale an idea. And so I literally loaded up a U-Haul, drove all the way out to San Francisco, set everything up here, and have since expanded into New York with offices in New York and Berlin. And so I kind of like, think about this like journey of like, building a company that moves $325 million. It's backed by really amazing investors. We've grown and, to international operations. But one of the things that I sort of realized along the way is that hard times are inevitable. And this is not the parking lot that I slept in, but it's very similar. Prior to even going to college, I was very passionate about building a company, and I was very much driven by the idea of being a social entrepreneur. And when I sort of reflect back on the last decade's journey, I kind of started out here. I was living in a Porsche 924 Turbo in a parking lot in Washington State, trying to figure out what the fuck I'm going to do. And ultimately, that drove me to get a job at Radio Shack, and that ultimately evolved into, well, shit, I don't want to work 80 hours a week for the man. I'm going to go build my own thing. Got into community college, transferred out of community college into the University of Texas Business School, Macomb School, which was kind of awesome. Had a kid, right? All this stuff sort of like builds up, right? It's good and it's bad, and then it's good and it's bad again. And that's just sort of the factor of life. I actually think that it's a good thing. Much of my ability to fail and to fail quickly and to learn from those failures quickly actually helped me scale as an individual. And if it weren't for having this sort of higher calling, this higher purpose in life, I don't know if I would have ever actually have made it through all of that. But I ultimately, I think one of the things that is sort of not talked about enough is courage, right? Because to go through all these different things, it really does take a pretty tremendous amount of courage. Whether it's just sort of sitting up here and telling you that I fucked up a lot, or having the courage to, say, you know what, I don't care if I'm living in my car, I'm going to figure this shit out. I'm going to battle my way to the top. And I think courage is ultimately the most important virtue that any entrepreneur, whether it's a social entrepreneur or a political entrepreneur or whatnot, I think courage is ultimately the number one thing you have to do, because you have to have courage to fail. You have to have courage to follow your purpose. You have to have courage to love, right? Courage, to me, is the number one thing that any entrepreneur should train in, because you will inevitably go through those hard times to get to sort of that next level. So my cause is something I call conscious commerce, right? It's the result of what I call a growing cause economy, right? A cause economy is just sort of a buzzword for values-driven commerce. And so for the last 3 days, like I was telling you earlier, I've been sort of sitting, I was in this Conscious Capitalism CEO Summit, and there's John Mackey over there, and the CEO of Panera, and of Container Store, and Cinnabon, and all sorts of really amazing, amazing people. It's all these guys, right? If you open up the Unilever annual report and look in the first, 20 pages or so, it talks about how they're investing in brands with purpose, right? It's not necessarily about, entirely being sort of purpose-driven as a company is a big part of it, but the cause economy is really an analogy to values-driven commerce, right? So when you look at some of these companies like the Toyota Prius, or why do you buy a Toyota Prius? It's closely aligned with the things that you care about. You care about the environment. You care about getting to and from work. It's probably the best way to put it. If you look back at the Toyota Prius 10 years ago, everybody just kind of laughed at it. They were like, it's the ugliest car I've ever seen. Who the hell would drive that? And today, celebrities are driving it. It's cool. Like, what? That's so weird. But what it is people are saying, you know what, I actually want to buy things that matter to me. I want to consume things that matter to me. And I want to participate in things that closely align to the things that I care about most. And that's been a very long sort of evolution. Now the Toyota Prius is the number 3 car in the world. That's pretty freaking fascinating to me. You look at Yoplait and Container Store and Tom's, Warby Parker, Apple, right? These are all brands that ultimately try to communicate a set of values to the world, and that's ultimately what's going to drive you to consume it. And at the end of the day, it's a pretty big market. And this is just advertising based on values. We haven't even talked about moving the traditional commerce itself yet, right? Actually purchasing a Toyota Prius, right? This is just to say, I think you should buy a Toyota Prius because you care about the environment. And so this is ultimately how I view the future of our economy and the future of our world. And this is where it's going to go. And for the next decade, that's what it's going to be, maybe even longer, right? If I look at my daughter's generation, she is so much more connected and driven by values than even I am, I think. And she's like 6, right? So, you could classify me as a millennial. You guys are all definitely millennials. I'm kind of on the tail end. I'm 31. But, we want to do the things that we care about most. And we want, it's not about making money. Rally has nothing to do about making money in my mind. It's not, I don't really care about it. It's not about that. It's about connecting people on the basis of values and connecting them around the things that they care about most. And so my vision is ultimately that Rally is connecting people's money to their values. It's a new graph. Right? You have social graph, expression, professional search, all these different things, right, that are going to create sort of graphs of information and data. And I believe Rally is ultimately building the first values graph, a way for people to connect together on the basis of the things that they care about most. And it's not even really about necessarily identifying values. It's about identifying values and prioritizing those values.
This room has terrible acoustics, so back here the sound is
Oh, okay.
dying off. Could you speak a little bit louder?
Yeah, sure.
Back here is sort of dying off. The acoustics in the room is terrible.
Yeah, you bet. So what I'll kind of talk about a story that I think is really interesting that is helping to drive home a lot of these different ideas that I have. Some months ago, there was a family in upstate New York. They had a barn that was out in the middle of nowhere somewhere. And it was sort of a place where everybody kind of gathered, right? And they played games and celebrated holidays and had a lot of meaning to a lot of different people. The most interesting thing that happened is that barn, this one thing that everybody loved and cared about the most sort of collectively as a group, actually burned down. And so some of their friends sort of turned around and said, well, let's just start a rally for it. And literally in a matter of weeks, they raised over $35,000 to rebuild the barn. And that one moment actually spoke to me more out of a number of different rallies that have happened over the years, because it sort of started communicating to me that what we're really experiencing is modern day barn raising, right? So if you want to talk about a little bit about the history of barn raising, if you go back to sort of like the 17th, 18th sort of century time period, barn raising was a pretty normal practice in sort of rural North America, right? There was this idea that people would come together as a community, and ultimately that community would lend a hand to various other members of the community, and together they would build each other's barns because they were extremely large, very expensive structures, and it really took a community to build this barn. But they were incredibly important because that's where you kept all your food and horses and livestock and all sorts of different things. And that practice kind of went away a little bit. And I think ultimately what's happening in many ways, and Rally is certainly a part of that process, is we're sort of reigniting that sort of community effort, where they sort of come together and they rally around the things that they care about most, the barn, or their friendship, or love, or family. Right? All these different things can be sort of implicitly pulled out of it. And we experienced this opportunity where literally in a matter of weeks, these individuals have had an opportunity to rebuild this thing that they all loved and cherished a lot. And they talk a lot on the internet about can you create a new verb and new actions and stuff like that, and is Twitter a new thing that we do? I actually don't. I disagree with this idea that you have to create this new behavior, because I don't think it's a new behavior per se. Like, there's people. If it weren't for Twitter, like, we'd just be doing it around the water cooler, right? Instead, now we can do it online. So maybe that's a new behavior, but the idea that we're just going to like share information with each other about what we're doing is not very new. The idea that we're going to help out friends and family in need and sort of rally around each other and rebuild each other's barns isn't exactly a new behavior, but it's a new medium, a new platform where you can actually do it in scale. It also gives us an opportunity to learn, right, and sort of a big sort of opportunity to aggregate that information and learn about what people care about and ultimately who they're connected to, and how can Rally as a platform help elevate those ideas so that more people can be driven by purpose and more people can sort of rally with their friends and family around the things that they care about most. So, I like this, and many of you are probably very familiar with it. It's Lady Liberty, right? Our logo is a flag. And I always really kind of liked this idea of the standard bearer in a military unit. It's the one guy that's not carrying a gun. It's the one guy that's at the front of the army leading the charge. It also happens to be the one thing that people sort of look to when they think all is lost or they need a little bit of hope, right? If the flag falls, it's up to somebody else behind them to pick up that flag and continue the march on. Otherwise, people will sit back and say, well, shoot, we've lost this war. Let's retreat, right? And so we integrate the flag a lot, and a lot of the concepts of a flag, even sort of our logo is kind of a little bit of a military unit, because it takes courage, it takes the ability to pick up that flag when nobody else will, to march forward. And I think that many of you here today have your own flags, right? And many of you need and want and desire to have the courage to carry that flag, to champion your cause, whatever it is. And I just simply encourage you to do that as often as possible, regardless of whether or not you think you're going to fail or not. Failure is a good thing. We've sort of institutionalized it in sort of the tech startup world as a lean startup methodology, which is fail fast, learn quickly, gather data, change course. And at the end of the day, I guess ultimately what I'm trying to do is encourage you guys to fail more often, because it's important for you guys to do that in order to learn and scale quickly as individuals. So this is a quote from Thomas Paine. I don't know if in our particular use case this is exactly what he intended us to use this quote, but we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And if you take anything from this little talk outside of, hopefully you liked the video, it was a good brand, that you guys simply just pick up your flags and try to change the world. I think that's exactly what being an entrepreneur driven by purpose, or a social entrepreneur, if you want to call it that, it ultimately means. So I'll pause there because I know I can definitely talk too much and too often. And really, at the end of the day, my favorite part of these things is really the Q&A. So I'd love for you guys to ask me as many questions as you possibly want. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks. Yeah. You and then her.
Okay. I was just curious about some of the challenges you faced during the process of scaling up to 6 million contributing members. So I was wondering if you could just talk about that.
From a technology perspective or in terms of building a business?
Both maybe.
Okay.
They're probably interrelated.
So I'm not much of a tech guy. I'm more on the product side, so I don't code or anything like that. I tried that in high school, and it was fun. Made my little websites for my little friends. But ultimately, I realized I was much better at driving the business behind these things. Outside of having a kick-ass engineering team and being relentless about recruiting amazing, stellar talent to do that kind of stuff, that's my solution from a technology perspective. In terms of the business side, that's quite a bit more challenging. You know, I've never run a company before in my life. I worked at Radio Shack. My dad never ran a company, like outside of little handyman jobs and things like that growing up. So I think the biggest challenge for me has been learning how to grow and scale myself to match the speed and scale of my company. Little things like being able to let go and let other people run things. That's a huge challenge. You wouldn't think it is, but it's probably the number one thing that challenges me the most, right? Because I want to be in on everything. Because when you're 4 dudes, it's easy to yell across at the dude across from you, like, dude, what the hell? Like, get the shit online. Let's go. We got business to take care of. But when you're 35 people with offices on 2 continents, and one of them being on the other side of the country, time zones and all these different things, and ultimately having faith and trust in your leadership at your company to handle those things for you, that's a huge challenge, right? Because it's your baby, it's your child, right? And so, it'll probably be a separate challenge once my daughter gets a little bit older. I'm very concerned about that one. Yeah, I think again, it comes back to courage, I think. Having the courage to let go, because that's super hard. Yeah.
So you said that for yourself, the number one thing that you're worried about is the cause and not about the financial aspect of it or your profits. But I'm just wondering, how does that work for your investors? They probably have a little different mindset.
Yep.
How do you balance the two, and what do your investors feel about you being so strong about cause over profit?
Yeah, so, that's a good question. I certainly get that question a lot. I'm not opposed to profit, right? I realize that profit is a very important part of the equation. I think that, one of the big sort of changes and transitions that have to happen is you have to bring in people that actually focus on that, right? You have to focus on the profit. I think the two can go hand in hand. And I think that's where values come into play internally at the company, to make sure that you stay on the course, you make money at the same time, but ultimately you're achieving the dream, right? Which is to build a platform that allows anybody to rally around the things that they care about most. But yeah, it's a constant battle. It's a constant struggle. It's the one thing I don't like to think about. So hopefully I can make somebody else think about it.
Which part of your life and education helped you the most while creating value?
In my education?
Yes.
Actually, I think it was, I don't know if I ever actually learned anything in school that helped me. I'm not going to lie. But what I did learn is, I think one of the greatest advantages that I had from going to college, and it's probably different for every individual, was the opportunity, right? The idea that I could dream this big, and it was totally acceptable, and I could totally achieve it. And that was one of the big things that I got from my education at the end of the day. I think that's, if everybody in this room can walk away with that one idea, I think that's awesome, because that's what education is for at the end of the day.
Can you explain a little bit more about...
I'm going to go back this way. I'm not avoiding all y'all. Sorry.
No, this way. Could you explain a little bit more about like your business model? You talked a little bit about profit. How do you
Yep.
make profit?
Yep.
How does that work?
Yeah, so today we have one primary revenue stream. If you look under the hood of Rally, one of the things that I said really early on, when we first started building this stuff, the payment network was the most difficult part of this business, right? Pretty much the only player out there was PayPal. And whenever you would direct somebody to give, they'd have to go through this like PayPal paywall, as I would call it, nasty little yellow button, and then you'd have drop-off and conversion issues and all sorts of stuff. There was no API set where I could integrate it in my user flow, right? And so I said, well, I'll just build PayPal. That sounds good. And so I kind of tackled it that way. And so I started trying to figure out, how do I build payment networks, payment processing platforms? What's the financial infrastructure look like at this scale? And so ultimately, we took a huge risk, and it was a huge bet, but we ended up building our own payment platform. So we move all that money ourselves across various banking networks and card networks. And so we make money on the transaction. So much in the same way that PayPal makes money, processing and moving money. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
So I've actually never used Rally, but looking at other like crowdfunding things, like Kickstarter, for example.
Sure.
The money that you put towards a cause, you only pay that money if the total gets raised. Do you guys
Right.
work on a similar system?
Our system's a little bit different. So Kickstarter is built on top of Amazon payments. So you have sort of that Amazon payment layer, and then the money that Kickstarter needs to make on top of that, which generally puts their fees between somewhere in 8 to 10% for most other players out in the market. We're kind of building on top of a retail payment tech layer, whereas we're the actual payment tech layer. And so our fees are actually significantly lower than most everyone else out there, primarily because we own the payment tech. What was the second part of your question?
And is it like goal-based funding? Or
Yeah, so it's funny because I look at a lot of these crowdfunding platforms, they kind of like think that they're going to allow you to have these like little tips and tricks and trick plays, if you will, goals, and put your money in, and if you don't hit your goal, you get your money back. We don't really do any of that. And the reason we don't do any of that is that's not really fundraising, right? It's elements of fundraising, but fundraising is based on two primary variables. That's connection and story. And so really, Rally is more of a long-form fundraising, right? When I go raise money for Rally, it's taken me a really long time, right? Telling our story over and over and over and over again to as many people as I possibly can to build up a base set of supporters that will allow me to ultimately raise money to achieve the dream. And if you look at anybody that does any legitimate fundraising, it's very long-oriented. Now, will you have goals? Absolutely, right? Those are just sort of elements or chapters of a story in my mind, right? I'm going to raise money for this goal, and then what? What did I do with that money? And after I've done what I said I'm going to do, what's next? So I'm going to start raising money for that. So Rally's a lot more long form than sort of these isolated 30-day projects. What's that? There's no time limit, no. And we have rallies that have been raising money for over a year, which is awesome. And that's legitimately how it's done, right? Any political campaign, nonprofit, they're raising money every day, every month, month over month, year over year. And so we wanted to build a platform that ultimately matched that sort of storytelling component of fundraising, which is at the end of the day what people buy into the most. Go with that guy back there. Yeah.
Mentioned the ability to cope with failure.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could share a story of when you felt that you hit a wall, you failed completely, and how did you raise from that point?
There's lots of those. Let me think of a good one. I think that there's sort of the early days of my life, which was like living in my car, which just sucked ass. I mean, it was the worst ever. And I'm sorry to use profane language. That's just kind of how I do things. But, there's nothing worse than that. You feel miserable, you look miserable, nobody really wants to be your friend, but you still have to get up every single day and march forward and hope that, the next day will be a little bit better. So I think, that and when I was raising money early on for Rally, we had these really amazing growth and opportunity, but everyone's like, there's no money in charity. There's no money in causes, so we're not going to invest, right? And, the number of doors I knocked on to try to raise capital for our company, and the number of times I heard the words no, and actually quite often they would just not say anything at all, which is basically saying no. That was a battle, right, all in itself. And, I think when you tie that into, in many times I was waiting tables at a Mexican restaurant trying to figure out how to make ends meet while I'm sort of achieving this goal. The best answer is you just simply stand up and you put another foot forward and you just keep going. You just have to have that courage, because many times you just kind of want to fall down into a little corner and start crying because life sucks so much. But at the end of the day, you just keep going, and you have to be motivated beyond what's happening in front of you today. And I think, being able to dream big and to ultimately have that courage really sort of empowered me to keep moving. I'm sorry, say that again. Yeah, all the time, actually. When I saw these people raise money to rebuild their barn, that made me super happy. Right now, there's a really big one going on the platform. Are you familiar with all the Edward Snowden, the LavaBit email battle thing that's going on with the NSA? And anyways, the dude that owns the email company is using Rally to raise money for a legal defense fund to go fight the NSA. And he's raised almost $100,000 in about a week to go do that. And that's awesome. I have these moments every single day. It's probably one of the coolest parts about this job is every day there's a new story of something really awesome and badass happening. Whether it's a kid who needs money to pay off medical bills or get treatment. Had a kid from Costa Rica raise over $100,000 after he got accepted into Cornell. Right? And now he's assistant something to the UN Secretary General or whatever. In a year, we fundamentally altered the trajectory of his life, right? And that kind of stuff happens on a daily basis for us. And so that's a little mind-blowing. So every day that's another thing that keeps me putting one foot in front of the other. Yeah.
How much are you driven by intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivations? And
Yeah.
do you feel like that's important? How do you feel like that's impacting you?
Yeah, I am not driven by external motivation at all. I'm not driven by money. I'm not driven by my parents telling me I should go to college and things like that. I'm not motivated by that at all. I am very, very intrinsically motivated. I think you kind of have to be to sort of distort your reality enough to get there. So I hope that helps. Yeah. Yeah.
How did you decide on the size of your commission, and how did you implement it? Did you run some experiments?
How do we determine what the rate was? A little bit like this. That's how we did it. Early on, we just sort of tested. We didn't really we just sort of said, here's the rate. We've gotten a little bit smarter about it over the years to sort of see if there's a rate that the market will bear. But at the same time, I'm less concerned about I'll drop my rate to 0 if I have to. It's more about, in my opinion, building that values graph and ultimately learning about what it is that people care about, because I think that's ultimately the big opportunity for Rally, right, is the ability to help connect consumers' money with the things that they care about most, outside of just fundraising.
Right now, how are you thinking about it? Do you have it at a level that allows you to sort of market your product and keep your operations going while being able to raise price?
It's always a constant balance between growth and profitability. And it's knowing when to step on the gas to get more growth and when to not step on the gas and angle towards profitability. There is no single right answer. It's just a matter of just constantly trying new things and paying attention to the data. There's many companies that are very unprofitable for many years. You can look at a number of different startups that have even IPO'd to see that. But ultimately, they're sort of betting on future value of the company. And so it is, you want to monitor your burn for sure, and try to tie that with various achievements and goals to hit different inflection points to hopefully raise enough money to go into a growth phase or whatnot. So it's kind of a complicated dance. Yeah.
So on a similar note, if someone's donating $10, $15 out of a pretty small paycheck,
Yep.
a few dollars can actually be a pretty big pain point. Are you guys doing anything to share your story and kind of the importance of sustainability for the company? Like, how are you guys getting across, like, where that money is going? Like, where's the transparency?
Yeah, in terms of when somebody donates, when they give their money to
Like
something.
$2 out of their donation.
Yeah, so I've ultimately sat back and made the decision that it's really not our responsibility to determine whether or not, if you gave $10 to somebody, did they do something with that $10 that they said they were going to do? It's not entirely Rally's responsibility to make sure that happens.
Like
Is that what you
$2
mean?
or $3 or whatever that intermediary fee that you guys are pulling out for yourself?
Oh, for our fees. Yeah.
Your own fees.
And do we?
Like, how are you guys working with transparency there?
Oh, okay.
Like, share the story of where that's going and why it's important to sustainability. And that
Yeah, we don't share that story. Ultimately, I'm happy to answer that question. It goes right back into our bank account, and we hire more people to grow and build the company. I think the company does a number of different things. From a sort of give back perspective, we had this thing called Rally Pad for a while, where we subsidized space for entrepreneurs that wanted to build social enterprises or nonprofits, and so that was a Clinton Global Initiative commitment that we made almost 2 years ago now. So we do things like that. Lots of volunteering. I donate to a ton of rallies as well too. So we sort of put it back into the system and sort of pay it forward in various different ways, but we don't really necessarily advertise it. Yeah. No, I mean, at the end of the day, we're a business, right? And our business is to empower other people. And we're building a platform to empower other people. So we don't really, outside of that fundamental mission, we constantly are reinvesting in that. Building a company is very difficult, and hiring all the right employees, and it costs quite a bit of money. And so it usually goes back into the business to try to continue to grow and scale and build the business. But we do have various initiatives internally that, like Rally Pad and stuff, where we give back to the community. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about how crowdfunding has kind of transformed the social giving space?
Yeah.
So it seems like traditionally the more you're giving to local charities, museums, universities,
Totally.
issues that are close to home, and it seems like looking at the trajectory since crowdfunding has started taking off, is that people are reaching Africa and helping spur educational initiatives there, and they're touching parts of the
Yeah.
members and beyond users?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's something that we're constantly trying to figure out. How do we measure the impact of a dollar is going to be totally dependent on the different rallies that are created, right? I think that ultimately what we've done that we can, to a certain degree, measure is provide a medium or a platform where people can sort of engage in these barn-raising initiatives as a community. So that's, in one way, we can measure our impact in the form of dollars that are driven to these different rallies, the number of rallies that are created on a regular basis, the stories that come out of them that we try to share on a regular basis. But ultimately, our focus and our purpose, if you rewind just even 2 or 3 years ago, platforms like this did not exist, right? I mean, if you wanted to raise money for something, there really wasn't anything for you to do outside of getting a merchant account, which for most folks is a very complicated, annoying process if you even get approved. And so we've really simplified the way for people to bring people together to allocate funds towards the things that they ultimately really care about. How does that ultimately impact sort of the larger, I guess, opportunities in philanthropy? I think it's still yet to be determined, really. I don't think anybody ever thought somebody could move $325 million across a network. That's kind of crazy. And I think that many not large institutional nonprofits are starting to see that at the end of the day, they kind of have to get their act together a little bit because people do want to give local and give to the things that they care about the most. I think that the big transformation is not going to come through crowdfunding, though. I think crowdfunding, to a certain extent, is a fad. I don't think it's actually going to survive for very long as an industry. It's a very difficult business. How you monetize crowdfunding at the transaction layer is even more difficult. But I do think what's ultimately going to happen is you're going to start having more for-profit companies that are going to build products that ultimately give back throughout the entire supply chain and empower all their key stakeholders to be more directed in terms of how that product supports various causes. Versus cause marketing. Cause marketing is kind of like the old way, where it's like, okay, we're Ford, we made a shit ton of money, we better go to some nonprofit and give some back and have a cool campaign around it. It's more about integrating the process of giving back into the entire business. Whether that's, allocating a certain piece of retail product sold to a cause that's associated with it, to higher wages for workers in developing countries, to making sure that if you're doing things like using chemicals in your product, you're dealing with them appropriately, and at the bare minimum, investing in things that ultimately help you get rid of them maybe in a better process. I don't know. But it's sort of integrating that into the entire business itself, which I think is going to dwarf, nonprofits and stuff entirely. I think that's where the future is. There's this idea in the nonprofit space that I can't really spend money on advertising and infrastructure, right, which is kind of silly. And I think that, they like to brag about how, 5% of our budget goes to overhead, so 95% goes to the ground. And, is that the right thing to get excited about? I don't think so. I think the thing to get excited about is, did you actually achieve the goal? Did you eliminate that as a problem? And I think that business has more of an opportunity to do that in scale than large institutional, like nonprofits and NGOs. And I say crowdfunding's a fad. I'm certainly a part of that, but it's not why I'm in business, right? I'm in the business of improving lives. So I'm going to build whatever it takes in order to be in that business, which is, I think, a big differentiator. Because I think a lot of people are sort of chasing this sort of crowdfunding, like it's the next big thing. You have to be really freaking big to make a good business out of that, right? So look at PayPal, for example. They move $60 billion a year. And they're only really just now becoming a really big, awesome part of eBay's business, right? And that's really sort of a recent phenomenon over the last, 5 years or so. Can a crowdfunding platform move $60 billion a year? I think it's going to be very difficult without sort of tapping into, without going to the big, NGOs and building in vertical solutions to process and move money. So there has to be something bigger. And ultimately, why are we doing crowdfunding? I think it's because of barn raising. I think we all want to come together as a community and do something and invest in people that we care about and love the most. And so how do you sort of take that and scale that idea versus the mechanism to get there? That's what I think about more often than not. Yeah.
When you were initially just starting out,
Yeah.
Two questions. Number one, how did you pick the other people who wanted this? Like, how did this group, your kind of group form?
Yep.
And then about how many hours a week were you devoting to the business instead of everything else?
That's an awesome question. So one of my co-founders I went to middle school with. He's just a badass programmer, and I was like, you can build my shit, let's go. And then another co-founder was just another friend from middle school. Another one was just an awesome designer I knew. Somehow convinced him to design stuff for me. And that's kind of how the group came together. There wasn't really anything special about it other than going to my friends and saying, let's go build something. Ultimately, we started out first building a consulting firm, and that was doing political consulting. We all had this dream and passion to build a business. We just didn't know exactly what we were going to build. We kind of had a general idea of where we were going to go, but we didn't know exactly what we were going to do. So that, serendipity, talking to people, figuring out what they're doing, finding a way to build a little community around your idea. I think that's ultimately it. And how much time? Let's just say I was never in class. I was too busy building the business, and luckily I convinced enough of my professors to do independent study with me, which helped. So I dedicated pretty much as much time as humanly possible. Sleeping is a good thing. I didn't do that. So, yeah.
So based on the data you're gathering, who uses your platform?
Yeah.
Why do they use your platform?
Yep.
And why are these people different, like their spending patterns and things like that,
Yeah.
from the other crowdfunding sources?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Typically, most of our users are cause-based. They're individuals who want to lead an effort to solve some sort of problem, generally speaking. They have some sort of cause they're motivated by, whether it's eliminating poverty or somebody raising money to pay off their medical bills, to a kid that wants to go to college. We've even worked with universities before, and they use us quite a bit to create a more social way to engage from an alumni perspective, alumni participation. So I think a lot of them come to us for that. I think the other reason that a lot of folks come to us is we actually embrace the natural idea of fundraising, which is that it's not really about all these little game mechanics that you want to try to include. At the end of the day, the reason that campaign is raising money is because I take that link and I email it to all my friends and I tell them to give. And then that creates social proof amongst my community, and that kind of expands from there. So it's story and connection. And so we really sort of embrace that idea of long-form narratives, telling stories over a long period of time, building a community and building that audience, and ultimately raising money. You can certainly have a goal for periods of time or drives as a part of that process, but we kind of give people this opportunity to build a community versus just sort of these like flash sale, like 30-day projects, and then it's kind of evaporates and your community's gone.
So what are the biggest advantages and disadvantages of like comparing the two?
Oh, of what now?
Like the biggest advantages and disadvantages comparing, for example, like the 30-day limit versus the natural fundraising process.
It depends, right? I mean, when we've done regression analysis against what are the variables that equal success, and success being defined as, raising some amount of funding for my rally, if you connect with at least 5 people or more and share your rally with them, if I connect it to Facebook, which is basically the same thing, connecting to my friends, connection, and use a video, you have an 86% probability of raising money. None of that, all the other stuff, super tiny impact, right, in terms of whether or not you're ultimately going to be successful. And so we just sort of hone in on those key variables that make you successful, and that ultimately allows you to be more effective at raising money around your thing. So it's beyond my pay grade in terms of what I'm good at, but there's a lot of data science that goes into ultimately driving the development of our product. And we have a really good product team that sort of analyzes that on a regular basis. Yeah.
So you raised around $8 million for your
Yep.
Series A, and
Yep.
it was all online.
Yep.
And that's very impressive. So
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about how that worked?
Yep.
How did you manage to do it? How did you attract those people? And can you walk us through that journey?
So it started out as an experiment. Myself and one of my investors, a gentleman by the name of Mike Maples, we were getting ready to go out and raise our sort of next round of venture financing. And we actually really only wanted to raise $5 million. And it wasn't going to be really that big of a challenge per se, but we were sitting there talking to Mike, and Mike's like, maybe we should go try AngelList. I was like, that's a neat idea. It's kind of cool. It kind of shows that we're eating our own dog food a little bit. I like that. So we connected with Naval over at AngelList and said, hey, we want to try something. Has anybody raised a Series A online? Right? So if you know Mike Maples, he's a maverick. I'm a bit of a maverick too. We just like to do things a little bit differently. And of course, Naval is kind of the same way too. And when you get 3 mavericks together in a room, something dangerous is going to happen. So we sort of sat back and said, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And, I was curious and excited and a little bit skeptical all at the same time. Maybe I should just, go the traditional route and do it that way. And I said, okay, well, whatever. Created my profile on AngelList, hit submit, closed my computer, and went and got a haircut. And I was literally sitting in the chair getting my haircut, and all of a sudden my phone started blowing up. Just one beep after another. I was like, what the fuck is going on here? And so checked my phone. I had all these emails sort of being inbounded to my phone, and I was like, so-and-so's interested in investing in Rally. So-and-so's in there. I was like, holy shit. So I hightailed it out of there, ran to my office. I canceled everything I was doing for the next week. And I said, grabbed my assistant. I was like, we need to start triaging this stuff. She created an Excel spreadsheet. I mean, everything we were doing all on the fly. And as each subsequent investor started to invest, committed to investing, we would ultimately lock them in after they sort of committed that they wanted to invest. We would sort of vet a lot of these people in real time. Who are they? Can they help the company? Can they help us grow? All these different things as fast as we possibly could. it was really just this huge avalanche that kind of came out of nowhere, caught us off guard a little bit, in a good way. And so we were wanting to raise 5. We ended up raising nearly 8. And then I kind of just had to say, like, no and turn it off, basically. But I think a lot of it sort of resonates with what we sort of believe in at Rally, which is story and connection, right? So, when we talk about the story of Rally and what the future of the cause economy and conscious capitalism, in the next decade or two of consumer experience being driven around values-based commerce, I think that story resonates a lot with investors because it's an interesting business, it's a big idea, and we just had a really interesting, compelling story. And ultimately, as more people started investing, that created sort of a connection of social proof in the round, which ultimately drove more people to want to invest. And so sort of those two things combined that ultimately was just created the perfect storm. And we caught lightning in a bottle. And we definitely maximized it for sure.
As a follow-up, if you don't mind sharing, how would a first meeting with an investor would go, and what would be your pitch to them?
For me?
Yes, when you go to the meeting with one of those investors to close them.
Sure.
How would that meeting go? What would you tell them? How would you pitch Rally to those investors?
Yeah. I really, again, I pitch Rally. I mean, much of what I showed you up here is right out of my pitch deck, right? And it's this idea that Rally is building a platform that allows people to connect on the basis of values and to connect those values to the things and people that they care about most. The long-term potential really has a lot to do with how do we help consumers better connect with brands, and how do we help brands better connect with consumers. And that we believe that the conscious commerce and the cause economy is the next decade of consumer experience. That's pretty much the pitch. And then we kind of go through the slides in a regular process. And talk about how big conscious commerce is ultimately going to be. And it's going to be massive. All of us are starting to engage in it on a regular basis, right? When we walk around with our Tom shoes, we're all advertising to the whole world, I give a shit about something. And I give a shit about helping people in the developing world. And it's just a little logo on the back of our shoe. And then we connect with people on that. Or Patagonia, or the Prius. Like, I think these are all really great examples. You can even look to media and entertainment, right? There's a really great company called Participant Media, right? They are specifically focused on double bottom line entertainment, and they're killing it.
Can I just interject?
Yeah.
Sally Osberg from Skoll Foundation is
Mhm.
coming. And
Cool.
Jeff Skoll is the one who was one
That's
of the
right.
funders in the participant
Yeah.
production.
That's right. Jeff Skoll is a huge, it's his baby. It's the one thing that he really cares about. And look, it's a big business. These guys are real. They had, I think, like 3 films in the Oscars, or more than that this year. Right, that's phenomenal. Right? People want to connect with the things that they care about most, and they want to tie their consumption to those things. It's not necessarily about social commerce, which are some of the buzzy words from back in the day. It's like, if you think about sort of society, you could say that values are really the root of everything, right? That's how we sort of come together as a culture, as we come together as society. We all sort of come together because we have the same values, and we care. Like, all of you guys are in this room because you care about the same thing, right? That's a big deal, right? And somebody wants to figure out how to market to you and say, look, we've got a product over here that matches the things that you guys care about. Except that nobody knows how to do that yet, right? Outside of, oh, you're connected to this person and this person and this person, I've tagged my profile this. I really want to understand what do you care about? And then how do you prioritize the things that you care about? Because ultimately that's going to allow you as a consumer to more effectively connect with the products that ultimately you want to consume.
Talk more about the traffic that gets to your website. Do you see a lot of people sort of hanging out on Rally and finding the
Yeah.
places they want to donate to, or do you see people following one particular cause? And
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, it's usually in and out. There's a number of different ways that you can use Rally. You can integrate it at the API level, which we get a lot of. And then, when people connect with rallies, much of our communication is done at sort of like an email, through email notification. And so you can consume the content right in your inbox, basically. But the one thing that we are very careful about is, it's kind of like, do you really want to be hit over the head every single day about, we need to solve this poverty problem? Like, the average consumer wants to be engaged enough, but not necessarily be involved on a regular day-to-day basis. Which is why I feel like the big opportunity is conscious commerce, right? Because it allows me to sort of ubiquitously give, right? Through the clothes I buy, through the food I eat, to the place that I live. It's sort of like this ubiquitous giving model, whereby simply existing, I'm investing in the things that I care about the most, versus having to watch a video every day about why I suck.
So if that's the case, where you see Rally going, if you see the world moving towards a more...
Yeah, I think the big thing that I'm most interested with Rally is learning. How do I learn about what people care about and who they're connected to, and what's the best avenue to do that? And how do I connect a wallet to a network under that same premise? So much of what we're doing today is learning about the market. Right? Nobody really knows what the cause economy is going to be like. We have some ideas and theories of where it's going to be, and I feel fairly certain it's going to exist. All I have to do is sit in a room with 100 other high-level CEOs talking about this on a day-to-day basis, and it's like, wow, that guy's got an $11 billion company. That guy's got a $1 billion company, and it's all companies that are heavily investing in marketing to consumers products that ultimately make the world a better place. And so it's pretty clear that that cause economy is going to exist in the future. How do you get there, and how do you be the first company to get there is a good question. Are we ready today to have a marketplace online to go buy products that connect with our values? Or is it going to be 3 to 5 years from now? And if it's 3 to 5 years from now, build into that point to where I'm ready to take an action on that opportunity, right? I saw a question over here.
During the Advent weekend this past year, they had a Stanford alum that has a very similar website called change.org.
Yeah, Ben. Yep.
Petitions.
Yeah, he's great.
One of the problems that he's had in the past is there have been some petitions which didn't ally with his own personal morals. Have you ever had that problem with Rally, where there's been a rally for something that you personally don't agree with, and have you done anything about it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Our PR people ask that one a lot, for obvious reasons. Ben's a really good guy. We're actually having lunch in a couple weeks. Rally for Change. Some cool stuff maybe we can do there. Hint, hint, if he listens to this audio. Yeah, certainly. I've certainly seen a number of rallies that are created that probably go against the things that I value. We've sort of had to take the position of, are they breaking a law? Are they con artists? Are they conducting fraud? And those are the big things that we sort of focus on. As long as they're operating within the framework of the law, then we're kind of Switzerland a little bit. And we kind of have to let them look. And at the same time, if you create a rally, and it's like a really immoral cause, how many people are really going to join that rally? Very few, right? The amount of fraud that we have to deal with is really low because you're not going to give money to something that you aren't connected to. That just doesn't happen, which is why when you go to rally, it's not a marketplace where I can browse stuff to give money to. It's really there just to highlight different experiences that people have. Because the average consumer isn't going to give money to something that they aren't in some form or fashion connected to. In the rare occasion where you sort of break, like if you think of fundraising as like an oscillation, right? You're going to hit that first and second degree network, and then you're kind of dead after that. And occasionally there are rallies that sort of break that sound barrier, that get out of that valley of death and become gargantuan massive stories. So it is usually media driven. And usually what ends up happening is the media sort of lends their brand as sort of a trust vehicle, right? The New York Times is reporting on this, right? Go check it out, right? And then it sort of creates this vacuum that allows you to do it. Like this lava bit thing, right? The amount of press and attention has driven a vast majority of the money that these guys have raised. We can see it through inbound referral traffic. And as these media outlets begin reporting and reporting and reporting, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the story takes on a whole new life, right? It becomes a story that people want to talk about. Did you hear about that lava bit guy? Did you hear about that watch? And then people want to get in and participate in that story. So, does that help? Cool. Okay.
So you talked a little bit about how people want to build communities of people with similar values.
Yep.
And so if you look at the other crowdfunding funding sites, you basically donate money and then it just says, okay, you didn't donate money, but there's no
Right.
So how do you guys rally? How do you
Sure. Well, so first and foremost, it's not a 30-day project, right? The idea is that, if I'm a rally leader, I should be updating my community on a regular basis. So you can publish content, photos, and videos, and blog posts, so that people that are following my rally can consume that content. So you're kind of a little bit of a publishing platform in that regard. And it's just sort of constantly curating that content out to your community to both grow the community as well as activate the community. And that activation is usually in the form of a donation, right? And it doesn't end, right? The rally doesn't ever really end. You can certainly have a 30-day goal or a drive that you can activate in your rally. But once that drive's over, it's like, great, now what? Now let's talk about what we did with the money that we raised. Let's talk about what we sort of think our next future plans are. And sort of really kind of cultivating this long-form narrative that will allow you to grow a community over time. Much like the community that I had to grow around Rally over the years. Ultimately, to be in a position to where I could activate that community and raise money to go and accomplish the idea. And I think that's one of the big differentiators behind what we do, right? A rally is a community first and foremost. And then you raise money for projects, and then you raise money for your ideas. Whereas everybody else is sort of focused on the project or focused on the idea, we're focused on the community.
So
Yeah.
you can, so for example, if I'm someone who believes in the cause, but I don't know if I want to donate money at this point, can I follow the
Yep.
rally and then eventually?
Exactly, that's the idea, right? And the idea is that I can just simply say I'm in, and now I get updates. And as I get these updates, I can ultimately decide if I want to give money. I get the updates and I can share the content with my friends, and then my friends can decide, do I want to get in that rally? And sort of optimizing that relationship, because that's ultimately how fundraising works.
Paul, can you connect the dots between
Yeah.
being a .org, nonprofit,
Yeah.
and having a VC meeting?
So I couldn't buy the .com because some guy in London wanted like £3 million for it, and I was like, get lost. So I was able to buy the .org, and I thought, the brand kind of matched the mission a little bit, so I married the two. Yeah.
From a legal perspective, it's a
It is a for-profit company. That's right. Yeah. I think you had a question too.
Oh, yeah. So any advice for us as we're, especially for us freshmen
Yeah.
just starting college or how do you
Learn how to be a hustler. Hustle, 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 and courage. Those are the big ones.
Thank you very much, Tom, for
Oh,
coming
thanks.
and teaching us
I
about
appreciate
Rally
that.
and your learning.
Awesome. Thank you.